Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today we're back with some Call of Duty Modern Warfare on Azir Cave playing some domination, and I am going to dip my toe into the pool of controversy by talking about the minimap. This has been such a crazy polarizing topic on Modern Warfare, with some people so vehemently against changing it and some who think that the current state of it is just not good enough. And I'm someone who initially thought it was a good idea to keep it limited, but as I've played more and more, I'm starting to think otherwise. So the main difference between how the minimap works now and past Call of Duty games, and pretty much like every shooter on the market, is that in old games, if you fired your weapon unsuppressed, you would appear as a red dot on the minimap, so you would give away your position. And it effectively created this dynamic where if you wanted to open fire, you would have to risk giving away where you are, and therefore you knew that enemies would be coming after you, which meant that you had to keep on the move. And so it created this cycle where you would want to take enemies out and shoot them, but you knew you had to keep moving if you wanted to stay alive. You could try and hold position if you wanted, but there was the risk that someone would outflank you because they know where you are. It wasn't necessarily super realistic, but it created this fantastic flow to the gameplay. But in Modern Warfare, they changed it a little bit. So you do have enemies reveal themselves with gunfire, but only through the compass. And the compass is a little bit more limited in that you can't see a 360 view of where enemies are. You only see this sort of diamond shape of them. And in terms of distance, there's this very rough indicator in terms of how big the diamond is. So if they're far away, it gets very small. If they're close, it's very big, but you can't exactly pinpoint an enemy. You can only tell roughly where they are. And in terms of frontal awareness, I've actually got no issue with the compass. In terms of knowing enemies in a general area, rather exactly where they are, I have actually got no problem with that whatsoever. I think that works quite nicely. However, I suppose where I've become frustrated is the number of deaths I've had from just behind where the compass can't tell me. The compass might have like an arrow saying there is something behind you, but it can't tell you exactly where they are. And what this means is if an enemy gets behind you, there is just no way that you can react to it in most circumstances. The time to kill is so low that you can't evade them, turn around and kill them. There's just nothing you can do because you didn't even know they were there. If you know they are there, you can at least maneuver yourself into cover quickly and return fire. And this is the thing, a lot of people talk about the time to kill being too low in this game, and I don't think that is a problem, because in COD 4, especially if you had stopping power, time to kill was very low there as well, and yet I think COD 4 had fantastic multiplayer, and I really wouldn't change anything about it. But what you did have in COD 4 was the situational awareness that's given to you by a red dot appearing on the minimap. So although you could die quickly, you also knew the angles from which you could die most of the time. Now don't get me wrong, that wasn't 100% true, because you could go up against enemies who are silenced, you could just get shot from someone who hasn't fired their weapon yet, but it kept things in check, it kept things balanced. Whereas in this game, there is a lot of guessing, there's a lot of trying to work out where they are, and realistically with a fixed field of view, you just can't always guess correctly because it is guessing. And the more guessing, the more chaotic your gameplay gets, the lower the skill ceiling gets, because of course that's an element of gameplay that you can't anticipate for, because I don't know what's coming from angles I just can't see and I can't perceive. Maybe I'll be able to hear them coming at me from their footsteps, maybe they'll fire their gun and I'll just be able to hear their gun. But again, with such fast-paced gameplay, it's super difficult to react. So it's gotten to the point where, although originally I wanted them to keep it as it was, I sort of, for certain game modes, want them to go back to the old style. I think game modes, I think it's fine to leave it as it is. Would be gunfight, because it's so small anyway, you don't really need it. Ground war, bizarrely, I think will be okay too. That's largely because UAVs are going off all the time anyway, so you don't really need it. But in terms of domination and team deathmatch, I mean, seriously team deathmatch, but domination as well, I think there just needs to be more intel to the player in terms of where the enemies are, because these maps are quite big, they're quite complex, there are lots of windows, in some areas they can be very dark, and a lot of the time you just don't see them coming. That is the crazy thing about this game. One of my greatest focal points of frustration is very simple. It's the unforeseen death. And in previous games, this usually took the form of being shot in the back or a cooked grenade. Cooked grenade is a classic example because there's no way you can react to that because it will just blow up and you can do nothing, right? But in this game, you can be shot from so many angles that you can't anticipate all of them. A lot of people early on talked about checking your corners, and I understand the concept behind that. You want to make sure you're looking everywhere because your enemy could be anywhere. But the reality is, you can do this thing where you look to the right, you make sure your enemy's not there. You go, great, they're not there. You look to the left, and when you look to the left, the enemy comes from the right. So checking your corners doesn't really work because that works on the assumption that when you go to look at that particular corner, the enemy will be in that corner. That's not always the case. If you walk into a room from one corner and there are 3 corners in the room, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of guessing that you looked at the correct corner first. So it's creating this sense of chaos where there's a lot of guesswork that you're looking in the right place at the right time. So the unforeseen deaths and the sense of chaos, I think, in Domination are making it a little bit less fun than previous Call of Duties. Like COD always felt chaotic, but it was more due to the sheer speed of it all. In this, it's more due to the sheer unpredictability of it. I don't think the game, as some people have put it, is broken or unfun or unenjoyable. I actually think it is pretty good. Like, I did enjoy playing the game you're seeing here. I felt that playing it slowly did result in victory, but there are just enough deaths where the person that killed me, I barely saw them. Like, sometimes I don't see them until I drop down dead because there just wasn't enough time for me to know that they were there, or they were in a position where I couldn't possibly see them. In this game, it was more there was this one guy who always seemed to be in front of me when I was sprinting. I think that was just like unlucky on my part, but that's what happened. So a lot of people have talked about how it's killed rushing, and in the traditional sense it really has. It's very hard to rush in this game, but I was never really a rusher. I was more of a sort of middle ground guy. I really can't stand camping, like staying in the exact same place for more than 30 seconds. But I didn't run around chaotically either because that just never worked out well for me. But even if you do move slowly, move in a lowered position and keep to cover, you just don't know, for example, if you're going to get shot in the back, shot in the side, above. Sometimes on some maps it gets so crazy. And I do wonder sometimes if this isn't a result of players being frustrated at 3-lane maps, because in past games there was the criticism that maps were actually too predictable, that you would know exactly where an enemy is because there are only so many routes they could even take, and it got to the point where people would say this is so predictable now it's not even very replayable. But it's like they went in the complete opposite direction and created constant chaos and constant unpredictability. Like, if you look at 2 ideas here, like complex maps and lack of red dots when you fire a weapon, if they had have just done one of those things, I think they would have tipped the balance. It's the fact they did so much at once to counter it that they've sort of over-calibrated it, in my opinion. So my final thoughts on all of this is that now, having played it for specific modes like Domination and Team Deathmatch, I think the old school minimap should return. For some game modes like Gunfight and even Ground War, leave it out. I don't think it's necessary there, but it has its place. As always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.